14 is a monster, for sure. All right, well, chapter 14 it is. Finally, we have arrived, right? And for those of you who love math, you will love chapter 14. For those of you who dislike math, I am sorry. Because chapter 14 is, 14 and 17 are the two chapters that are just all math. And if you notice, a couple of my other students from day classes are here, they can, she'd be glad to assure you that 17 is just as bad when it comes to math, right? That's what we did all day today was chapter 17 with them. So, like I said, if you like math, this is the chapter for you. If you don't, then this will be the chapter you will love to hate. But what I'll tell you is this. I would estimate probably as much as half of the math on the final exam comes from this one chapter. And probably 2/3 of the math total on the exam come from chapters 14 and 17. In that regard, it is really important to get the math in these two chapters so that you can be on good footing as we go into them. So let's go ahead and get started. The good news is we're not going to start right away with the math because we've got to do some kind of theory stuff and kind of get that covered. Is that a good volume? Am I okay? Yes. All right, good. We got a new speaker bell. We have to blow you out of the room if we want to. You know, just crank that thing up and like pin your ears back for the rest of the night. So chapter 14 is finance. It deals with real estate finance and all the basics around real estate finance, and then the math surrounding real estate finance. One of the things that's going to be a challenge for you in this section is to sort of redefine for yourself a lot of terminology. Like, for example, a mortgage loan. Most of you think of just the word mortgage as a loan. It's not. A mortgage is not a loan. A mortgage loan is a loan, but we have to redefine that word mortgage, because actually defining the word mortgage as a loan is going to get you in trouble, because a mortgage is something entirely different than a loan. Now, a mortgage loan is indeed a loan based on pledging a property or house, in this case, as collateral for a loan. That idea is called hypothecation. Hypothecation is a really fancy word for just pledging real property as collateral. And we don't just do that in houses, we also do it with commercial property. So mortgage loans exist with commercial property as well. When you talk about mortgage loans, it's a lot like leases. We don't really care so much about how they operate as they're going. When we talked about leases last week, what did we say mattered? Not how they operated, but how they what? How they ended. And that's the same thing is true when you talk about mortgage loans. What really matters is not how they go along, but how they end. Because the truth is, nobody cares how they operate. As long as somebody's paying their mortgage note, as long as that bill's getting paid every month, do we really care how a mortgage loan operates? What we care about is how it ends. And mortgage loans can only end in one of two ways. They either get paid off and everybody's happy, or they don't and we end up in what process? Foreclosure. And so it's all going to be about foreclosure. Because again, nobody really cares how they end if everybody's happy. We only care how they end when everybody's not happy. And that's foreclosure. And so there are two different theories of mortgaging, which means there's two different theories of foreclosure, really. Ultimately, this is all going to boil down to foreclosure. How do we handle foreclosure? So this matters because whether we are a lien theory state or a title theory state is going to dictate the type of foreclosure process we utilize. And that's really what you got to get to in your brain. When we talk about this difference between lien theory states and title theory states, and I don't mean like states of mind, I mean literally like the states of the United States. Certain states use lien theory and certain states use title theory. And we're going to talk about the differences between those two, but the differences that matter are foreclosure. The way we process foreclosures is different in a lien theory state than it is in a title theory state. For your reference, North Carolina is a title theory state. All right? So let's talk about lien theory states first, and then we'll bring it back home to North Carolina. We spend more time, obviously, on title theory because North Carolina is a title theory state. But we also need you to know about lien theory because you're going to be taking a national portion of an exam, and lien theory states are going to show up on that national portion. So in a lien theory state, this is the more old-fashioned approach, the more traditional approach to lending money, to having a mortgage loan is called the lien theory approach. And the reason it's more traditional is it only involves two parties. Think about every contract has two, was that a sneeze? That was such a dainty little sneeze. Like, man, when I sneeze, like everybody for 3 miles knows I sneeze. I didn't know what that was. I thought it was like a cat had wandered into the room. Exactly. And I completely embarrassed her about it, you know, even though she was so dainty. I was like, wow, is that a sneeze? Well, bless you. So when we talk about lien theory, we only got two parties involved. We got the borrower and we got the lender. Now, that's really simple to understand. The problem is that when you only have two parties, like any contract that only involves two parties, if there's ultimately a dispute between those two parties, and what would the dispute be? In a mortgage loan, what would the dispute be? Somebody hasn't paid. Somebody hasn't paid. That's realistically the only dispute we're going to have. Where does a dispute get settled when there are only two parties involved in the contract? In court. And that's the unfortunate reality of a lien theory state. Because the loan itself only involves the borrower and the lender, then the only way we can end a dispute, the only way we can resolve a dispute between those two parties is if they go to court. And that's called a judicial foreclosure. So you need to know that about a lien theory. When you hear lien theory, you should automatically start to associate two parties, judicial foreclosure. Judicial foreclosure means a lawsuit, folks. It means somebody has to sue the other party. What party is it that's going to be suing the other party? I mean, think about it. The lender's already done everything they promised to do. They've already given the money. So who is it that's going to be sued here? It would be the borrower. It would be the lender filing a lawsuit against the borrower. And it's a lawsuit for foreclosure. Now let me ask you a question. Lawsuits in general, fast or slow? Slow. Slow. Very slow. So in a lien theory state, the foreclosure process is going to be really, really slow. It's going to take a really long time to get a foreclosure accomplished in a lien theory state. If you've ever watched the news, or if you remember back during the mortgage meltdown in the late 2000s, and you would hear about, oh, there are hundreds of thousands of foreclosure actions that are tied up in courts around the country. Well, what kind of states were they talking about? Those were lien theory states. I can guarantee you what you wouldn't find tied up in courts in North Carolina: foreclosures. Foreclosures aren't tied up in courts in North Carolina because foreclosures don't require a lawsuit in North Carolina. That only happens in a lien theory state, and we're not one of those. Does that make sense for you guys? So this is a very slow type of foreclosure. So let's talk about some of the terminologies surrounding a mortgage loan. What is a mortgage loan? Well, the mortgage loan itself is actually two different components. The first one that we're going to talk about, and what we're already sort of talking about now, is the collateral piece. A mortgage loan is based around collateral. What is the collateral? The house, the property. The house if we're in a residential loan, the property if we're in a commercial loan. The property is the collateral. The other side is the loan itself. That's called a promissory note. A promissory note is the loan. Now, we also have a name for the collateral. The mortgage is the collateral. The deed of trust is the collateral. Notice earlier I said you were going to have to get rid of that definition that you had in your mind that a mortgage was a loan. What is a mortgage? It's the collateral. A mortgage is the promise of collateral. We say the property is mortgaged. How many of you have ever heard that expression? Oh, that house is mortgaged. That's the correct use of the terminology, because the mortgage is not the loan. It's not the bank giving money. It's the owner of the property giving collateral to the bank. So who actually gives the mortgage? Who is the mortgagor here? Is it the bank or is it the borrower? It's the borrower. The mortgagor is the borrower. That's the person who gives this collateral. The borrower gives the collateral to the bank. Everybody okay with that? So what does that make the bank? The bank is the mortgagee. Exactly right. This works a lot better if you open it up. I was like, why is there no water in my mouth? You open it up, it works a lot better. So the bank is going to be the mortgagee. That's the lender. Now, what's interesting is these terminologies only come into play in a lien theory state. We only have mortgagors and mortgagees in a lien theory state. We don't have them in title theory states. We use different terminology in a title theory state. So this is still just terminology on the lien theory side. And is North Carolina a lien theory state? No, it is not. It is not. All right? So, one last reminder here. Foreclosure in a lien theory state, where does it happen? In court. In court. A borrower gets sued for foreclosure in a lien theory state. That doesn't happen in a title theory state. So let's talk about title theory and what's used in North Carolina. In North Carolina, we have a three-party system of mortgage loans, of lending for mortgages. Not two parties, but how many? Three. Well, you still obviously have to have the lender and the borrower. But we've introduced this third party. I always say that we've done this because we're such a sports-oriented state. Sports are a big deal here. When you have sports, you need a third party to call the shots. What do we call them in sports? A referee. In mortgages, we call them a trustee. When you talk about a mortgage loan in North Carolina, you talk about trustees. And we talk about deeds of trust. The trustee is the person who's been given the right to make the call. And there's only one call that gets made when it comes to a mortgage loan. What call is that? Whether or not to foreclose. See, in a title theory state, you don't need to go to court. In a lien theory state, you do. But in a title theory state, you don't need to go to court to foreclose. You just need to get the trustee to decide that foreclosure is the right course of action. So it's not going to be a court of law that forecloses in North Carolina. Who's going to foreclose in this state? The trustee. And the reason that they can foreclose is they've been given that right. They've been given this power of sale foreclosure. Does that make sense for everybody? They've been given the power to sell the property. Who do you think gave them that right? The borrower did. The borrower did. The borrower signed over that right to the trustee. That's why we call the borrower the grantor. They have granted this power over to the trustee. They sign, grantors sign a deed, right? You remember that from way back in the alienation chapter, the transfer of title chapter? And then this is true here too. A grantor signs a deed. We call it the deed of trust. That's the document that gives collateral in North Carolina. In a lien theory state, it's the mortgage that gives collateral. So the mortgage is the document in a lien theory state that would be recorded at the county courthouse that places the property as collateral. But in a title theory state like North Carolina, what document's going to be recorded at the county courthouse and give collateral in the property? The deed of trust. So would you, if you went down to the Wake County Courthouse, would you find any mortgages recorded? No, what would you find? Deeds of trust. Not deed of trust, deeds of trust. Yes, sir.
Is it fair to say that the owner has title to the property, but they've given up the right to possess it in a certain situation, that they've given permission for that title to flow to the lender under certain circumstances?
Not to the lender. Never to the lender.
To the trustee.
To the trustee.
Okay. So they're still technically an owner, but they've given...
Not technically an owner.
They are no.
They are the owner.
Okay.
They are the owner, but you're on the right hunt.
Okay.
You're on the right hunt. They are the owner. They're still the owner.
Okay.
But what they've done is given somebody, the trustee,
Like power of attorney.
power to take that ownership away.
All right.
They've given the trustee the power of sale. That's why we call it a power of sale foreclosure. So what we've signed over to the trustee is the ability to make that decision. The ability to say, nope, you're in default, we're going to take your property from you, we're going to sell it, and we're going to give the money to the beneficiary. Who do you think the beneficiary is? The lender. The lender is the beneficiary in a title theory state. So in a title theory state, rather than saying mortgagor or mortgagee, who's the mortgagor in a lien theory state? Who's giving the collateral? The borrower is. Who's receiving the collateral? The mortgagee. Who is that? The lender. Well, in a title theory state, we call the borrower the grantor, and we call the lender the beneficiary, because they benefit from this arrangement. You know, this trustee, you got to place a lot of trust in them, right? I mean, think about it. They have the power to do what? Yes, ma'am.
Well, the trustee is basically the middleman.
They are the middleman. They are the decision maker.
Okay. So if he defaults, the borrower defaults, then the trustee has the right to foreclose on the home. Or
Yes.
give the
Perfect. If the borrower defaults, then it's the trustee who has the right, who has the authority to foreclose on the property. It's not the lender who has the right to foreclose, it's the trustee who has the right to foreclose. So who's the lender going to run to and cry when the borrower hasn't paid their mortgage payment in the title theory state? The trustee. The lender's going to contact the trustee. Where does the lender have to go in a lien theory state if the borrower hasn't paid? To court. They have to go to court and sue the borrower. And then who's it going to be up to? A judge, a court of law, to decide if the borrower's in default. Whereas in a title theory state, the lender's going to notify the trustee. And it's going to be up to the trustee to make this decision. That's a big decision, isn't it? The trustee gets to decide, are you in default? Is this borrower in default? And if the trustee decides that the borrower is in default, then it's going to be the trustee who places that property for sale at the county courthouse.
and we give that permission to the trustee when we sign the deed
Of trust.
of trust.
That's right. That's exactly. Everybody hear her statement? She said the borrower gives that permission to the trustee when they sign the deed of trust. And that is absolutely correct. That is the perfect way to state that. So you better trust the trustee, right? And they're very trustworthy. They're attorneys. All attorneys are trustworthy, aren't they? Especially when you find out whose attorney they are. Whose attorney do you think they are?
The lender.
The lender's attorney. It's the lender's attorney.
So the trustee's the attorney. Oh,
The trustee is an attorney, and it's an attorney chosen by the lender. And people go, oh my God, that ain't fair. Well, nobody said it was. But if you want their money, this is the system. Yes, sir, Jake.
So in a title theory state, does that reduce a lot of the court costs to wrench to pull the title away, like through legal action, versus they've kind of already got permission to, like, that reduces the cost on the end of the owner as far as...
It does.
Okay.
It does. It's still expensive because this is still an attorney and you've got to pay their fee. Trustee doesn't come in for free and perform this service. I mean, this is a legal service, so if the trustee has to be notified that the borrower's in default and the trustee has to take the property and they have to place it for sale in a foreclosure sale, there's a fee associated with that.
They get paid first, right?
They do get paid
Before
first.
the city gets their.
That's right, they get paid first. We're going to talk about the distribution of proceeds, but you're exactly right, they're going to get paid first. So this is a fee that's going to get attached. In theory, this is less of a fee than would be attached to a foreclosure in a lien theory state. Because in a lien theory state, you've got to pay attorneys, but now you've got to pay them to actually prosecute a case, right? You know, they have to file a lawsuit, and it has to go through that process, and you have court costs, and you have attorney's fees. And so all of that's going to get tacked on to the loan balance itself. Does that make sense for everybody? When you talk about a foreclosure action, you no longer just owe the loan amount, but you owe any penalties for non-payment. Plus, all of these legal fees are going to get tacked on to the loan balance. So is the loan balance going to balloon up pretty quickly when we go to foreclosure? Yeah, big time. In North Carolina, to the tune of about $20,000, usually. That's pretty standard for a trustee's fee in North Carolina, about 20 grand. So that's going to get tacked on to the loan balance itself. Okay, everybody all right with that? I mean, I don't mean all right with that, but you understand it. You know, we good there? Okay, so that's the function of the trustee, is to decide when we are in default. And the document that gives them that right is the deed of trust. So if I said that deeds of trust are covered by the Connor Act, what would that mean for you? They have to be not only in writing, but they have to be what? Recorded in order to be enforceable in a court of law. Not only do they have to be in writing, but they also have to be recorded in order to be enforceable in a court of law. So deeds of trust got to be recorded. So if you go down to the county courthouse, you won't find a promissory note that's recorded. Remember, we said the promissory note is the loan itself. That's the document that governs the loan. But you would find a deed of trust to be recorded. Matter of fact, it has to be. Okay? So just a reminder, two main categories of foreclosure. What are they? Well, those are the methods of mortgaging, but the different types of foreclosure are what? Judicial and non-judicial. Judicial foreclosure happens where? In a lien theory state in a court of law. Non-judicial foreclosure happens in what kind of state? Title theory, and not in a court of law. Now there's a possible third method of foreclosure. You don't need to know much about it because it doesn't happen very often. Actually though, it's the one you thought was foreclosure.
Yeah, exactly.
A strict foreclosure is probably what your mental definition of foreclosure was prior to this class. Because prior to this class, if I'd asked you what was happening in a foreclosure, you probably would have said, oh, well, the bank's taking the house. How many of you would have said that?
Absolutely.
Most of us would. That's a strict foreclosure. Let me tell you why we don't do strict foreclosure in most states. Because in strict foreclosure, you give the bank the incentive to do some really nasty things. Because if it's a strict foreclosure and you're taking the property and giving it to the bank, let's say that Shanika owes $40,000 on her property, but it's worth $200,000. How quickly would a lender foreclose if they could get that property as a result of that foreclosure action? Oh, they would jump. They would jump on that, right? If they were going to end up with a property worth $200,000 and they were only owed $40,000, they'd jump all over that. Well, see, that's why we don't do it that way. See, what we don't do is take the property and give it to the lender. What we do is take the property and what? Sell it. Because when we do it that way, the lender's only going to get the money that they are what? Owed. So it takes away this big incentive for foreclosure. Does that kind of follow for you? Okay? So that's why we use a foreclosure sale. Now, this is what the process looks like in North Carolina. This is a title theory process of foreclosure. You don't really have to detail a judicial foreclosure or a lien theory process because we're not a lien theory state. And on the national part of the exam, they really just want you to know, do you know the difference between lien theory and title theory? But because we are a title theory state, you're going to have to go much more in depth with the process on a title theory state. Does that make sense? Just because it's here. So in North Carolina, the foreclosure process. Well, step one of the foreclosure process always starts with what? Somebody who doesn't what? They don't pay. They fall behind on their payments, which eventually leads to a default. Now, every loan is going to define a default differently. Being late is not necessarily a default. Just like any other contract, where do you need to look if you want to define what a default is? If you want to know what a default is for a loan, where do you need to look? In the contract. What do we call the contract for a loan? What was that? What was that phrase? The promissory note is the contract. The note, sometimes we just call it the note, is what's going to outline all the terms of that loan. So if you wanted to know what a default was for somebody's loan, the first thing you would say is, well, let me see your promissory note. Does that make sense for everybody? Okay. So let's say you look at the promissory note, and it says that default is 90 days past due. So when somebody goes 90 days past due, have they reached the default stage? They have. Now, the only two parties that know about that at this point in time are the borrower and who? Trustee doesn't know yet. The lender. The lender knows because they haven't been paid, and the borrower knows because they're not paying. The trustee does not get involved unless there's a problem. Is there a problem now? Yes. So, what's the next step? The lender's going to notify who? The trustee. The lender sends notice to the trustee. We have a problem. This borrower's in default. Now, once the trustee gets notice, they take the lender's word for it. Because remember, who are they? The lender's attorney. And once they get that notice, they send a notice of default to the borrower. Notice that notice of default doesn't come from the lender. Who does it come from? The trustee. The trustee sends that notice of default. And that is the beginning of the foreclosure process from a legal standpoint. When that borrower has received that notice of default from the trustee, the wheels are spinning. The time to make it right has come and gone. There's no catching up once you've gotten that notice of default. Because look at this little arrow right here. What does it say? This would be when what happens? When the entire loan balance is called immediately due. That is triggered by the notice of default. That notice of default triggers not just saying you're 3 months behind, you owe it all right now, or we will what? Foreclose. That's called an acceleration. They accelerate the due date. That's what that's called. They're accelerating the due date. And the reason they can do that is because the borrower has what? Has defaulted. The borrower has breached the contract. They defaulted on the note. And so now the trustee has accelerated the due date. The lender's no longer in control here. It's the trustee driving the bus at this point in time. Trustee has accelerated the due date. Trustee has sent a notice of default. Generally speaking, the notice of default gives a certain amount of time to the borrower to either pay all the money or the foreclosure process moves ahead. And the foreclosure process moving ahead involves the trustee placing the property for sale at the county courthouse. That would be the next step in the process. The trustee goes, they file an affidavit for possession. You don't need to know that, but it's just what happens. They go to the county courthouse, they file an affidavit for possession. What's possession mean? They're taking over what? The property, occupancy of the property. If the trustee's filing for possession, who does that mean they're taking possession from? From the borrower. That's exactly right. So they're filing that affidavit of possession. That's when the sheriff's department goes out and puts that notice on the door and says you got 10 days to do what? Get out. That the trustee has just filed that affidavit of possession. Notice, nowhere along the way have I said the court has to approve of any of this, have I? You know why? Because they don't. We are a non-judicial foreclosure state. It is all up to the trustee. It happens at the courthouse, but it's basically just filing paperwork. Yes, ma'am.
Is filing the affidavit of possession what takes it out of the owner's name and puts it in the trustee's name?
Not yet. Even once possession is taken, it's still in the name of the owner. Because it's not going to go, it never will go into the trustee's name. It will go straight from the owner's name to the buyer at the foreclosure sale. Did everybody hear that question? She said, when does title actually transfer? Not yet. Because we want to take possession. I don't want to do that, but they do. Okay. They want to take possession so that they can sell the property. Once they've got possession, they'll place the property for sale with the foreclosure sale. Everybody with me on what the step we are? Now, where's that foreclosure sale going to happen? At the courthouse. So now the property is available for bids at the county courthouse. It still belongs to the borrower. They don't have possession of it. They've been kicked out, but they are still the legal owners of it until that foreclosure sale is finalized. Does that make sense for everybody? So now we got bids going on. And eventually those bids are going to be finalized, and then that's when the auction becomes final. We're going to talk about when that actually is. A bid has an upset period. In other words, there's a certain amount of time after a bid is placed that somebody can come in and outbid that bid. In North Carolina, that's 10 days. That's a 10-day period of time in North Carolina. So from the time any bid is placed in a foreclosure auction, that bid has to sit there for a 10-day period, and during that 10-day period, anybody can come in and upset the bid. And if the bid gets upset, guess what also gets reset? The 10-day period. Because the bid has to sit unmolested. That's what the statute says. Don't molest the bids, you know. The bid has to be unmolested for 10 days.
So don't be touching and feeling.
Don't touch and feel on the bids, you know. Hands off the merchandise, please, right? You can molest it, but you got to give another 10 days, I guess, after you molest
That's what they
it.
So regular bid.
How is HOA able to foreclose on the property?
Same process. You mean because they don't have the power of sale? And a trustee will be appointed.
Who's the trustee?
So the first step for them would be to file for having a trustee appointed. Everybody understand her question? She's saying if an HOA wanted to foreclose, or the HOA, mechanics lien, any of those things, wanted to actually foreclose, they don't have a trustee in advance. So what they have to file is a court action to have a trustee appointed.
Yeah, that happened to one of my friends. The HOA took the house.
They
But she
can.
was determined she wasn't gonna pay them nothing. Standing you not for, and they went through all kind of crazy stuff.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
They found out.
From watching your videos, I think you were saying the bank wouldn't let that happen for death mortgage state. And then
Correct.
they
Generally
pay
speaking,
that bill and not
if there's a lender involved, the lender would step in and pay any outstanding tax bills, HOA dues, you know, those, because they just don't want to take the risk of the property getting snatched out from under them. That help?
That again now?
Yeah.
He says, generally speaking, the lender has the most to lose. So the lender is not going to allow a foreclosure to happen by other parties. If they see that there are other unpaid liens on the property, generally speaking, the lender will pay those liens and clear them so that they have the only lien on the property, and then they will foreclose. Because they stand to lose the most if the title gets transferred to somebody else and gets out of their control.
How do they know that?
Oh, well, they're notified by the court as soon as so every creditor against the property, everybody who has a lien against the property, as soon as a foreclosure action begins, there's going to be notices sent out to all the lien holders saying, this is happening.
So basically, the lender will pay the HOA or whatever.
And then foreclose themselves and add that amount to whatever they were already owed.
Even if they're not behind, they haven't defaulted
On their mortgage, correct. Generally speaking, their promissory note will have a statement in it about other liens on the property that says that other liens must be paid by the borrower in a timely fashion, and if they're not, the lender has the legal right to step in and pay the liens, and that is considered a default under the terms of the note. And so even if they were current on their note payments, but like for example didn't pay their property taxes, then the lender would have the right to step in and pay the property taxes and foreclose anyway, as a protection for themselves.
But why would they foreclose if the people paying the mortgage?
They didn't pay their property taxes, so the lender had to step in and pay the property taxes.
Somebody's gonna foreclose to get their.
Because otherwise the county would have foreclosed for the non-payment of property taxes. So lenders usually will have protections built into the note that say if there's any unpaid liens that could result in a foreclosure, the lender could choose to pay those liens and then foreclose themselves in order to protect their interest.
Now, if they pay up all those liens and the people still paying them, so what sense would it make them from foreclose if they still?
They can still foreclose because it's still a default. The note still defines it as a default if they didn't pay the other liens.
All the liens.
Mhm.
They'd be like, well, since you ain't paid them, well, you out.
Since you didn't pay them, we had to pay them. That means you have defaulted with us, and so we can move ahead with foreclosure.
Oh,
It's happened a lot, because like in Wake County, look at foreclosure, I mean, it's crazy how some people get foreclosed for 5,000, you know, it's just.
You would think it wouldn't happen. It happens more often than you would think, for sure. Yes, ma'am.
So I was just gonna ask, between when the trustee sends the notice of default to the time they place it for sale, is there any specific amount of days? or
No,
just what
it could be
is?
days, it could be weeks, it could be months. Now, this is when the trustee is going to rely back on what the lender wants, quite honestly, because ultimately, the lender is the one who cares about timeliness here, because it's the lender who's not getting mortgage payments, right? And so usually what the trustee will do is go ahead and file the notice of default, and then they will contact the lender and say, okay, we filed a notice of default, when do you want us to move forward? You tell us when you give us the green light. And in some cases, like for example, in the late 2000s when during the mortgage crisis, in some cases, the bigger banks like Bank of America, who had so many foreclosures going on that they couldn't process them, it was years between the time that the notice of default was filed and the actual affidavit of possession was recorded. You know, it could be years.
yeah, I was gonna ask about that because I knew someone went through that, and it was like 5 months.
It can be. It can. I mean, it's completely
They
up
were
to.
still in the house all that time.
Yep, absolutely, absolutely. Because remember, the notice of default just basically is like notice that we've started the foreclosure process, but it's the actual affidavit of possession that takes them out of the property. So there could be a lag time there. Now, I will tell you who won't have a lag time: State Employees Credit Union. If State Employees Credit Union contacts the trustee and tells them to file a notice of default, as soon as it gets filed, they'll say, "Yep, file the affidavit of possession."
Wow.
From the time you get, if you have a State Employees Credit Union note in this state, from the time you get the notice of default, well, first of all, their notes define default as 60 days past due. So you go 2 months late, you're in default with State Employees Credit Union.
Wow.
They will declare you in default on day 61. They will notify the trustee. You will get the notice of default within 2 weeks of going 2 months late.
Wow.
And they will file the affidavit of possession as soon as they have sent the notice of default. From the time you miss your first mortgage payment with them to the time you are out of that property is usually less than 100 days with them. With them. Now that's the express path. They do not play. And not only that, if you bank with them, you're very apt to see your house advertised for sale before you're even out of it when you go in the branch, because they will put signs. If you go in a State Employees branch and you go back there and they have a little bulletin board back there with the tear off things, it'll be your house on the picture before they even got you out of it. They do not play.
I was going to ask that question because I was confused when you were talking about on the video, you were saying that it's very rare that banks buy back the houses, but I was thinking, I think was there, but when you go in there, you see houses, so I'm thinking, are they buying back the
They buy them and then they turn around and sell them instantly as soon as the foreclosure auction's over.
So those are usually foreclosures that they're.
Well, ones that are going through the process. They a lot of times haven't quite made it all the way to the foreclosure sale, but they know it's coming.
And they also take from your checking account, just in order to get your mortgage through, you have to have an account with them. I have 2 loans through them for
Yeah.
that. And the thing is, when you say it's due on the 1st, if the 1st is on a Sunday, they will pull your mortgage payment on that Friday. They don't wait until Monday.
No, they pull it in
They pull on that
advance.
Friday. Just like
That's why their loans don't default. They have a really good track record. Their portfolio is very strong.
They got you.
So let's talk about paying off the proceeds. Because remember, the whole point of a foreclosure is to sell the property and then disperse the money. Does that make sense? I mean, think of it as it's not taking the property, it's selling the property and then distributing the money. Well, as JJ said earlier, the first thing that's going to get paid here is going to be the cost of the sale. So like the trustee, that trustee's fee, yes ma'am?
Sorry,
No.
going back to the foreclosure process. Every foreclosure goes through the auction.
Yes. Every foreclosure goes through the auction.
Okay.
Now, on that note, it is very common that the lender ends up with the property anyway, but they didn't take the property. What did they do to end up with it? How does the lender end up with the property?
They pay
They buy it at the auction.
Oh,
They buy it at the auction because they're going to almost always be the first bidder, folks. Remember, they have no potential loss by bidding what they're owed at the foreclosure auction. In other words, if they're owed $100,000, what's their first bid going to be on the property? $100,000, because if they write a check for $100,000 to the Wake County Courthouse, what are they going to get back the next day? $100,000 check. So it costs them nothing to essentially purchase the property. Does that make sense? What they don't want is for it to sell for $70,000, because then they're guaranteed that they just took a $30,000 loss. And what they would rather do is set the bid and hope somebody does what? Hope somebody bids higher. If somebody bids higher, they are happy as clams because they're going to get all their money.
And then some.
so is
So
that how
they
you
can't
get
take any action.
is that how you get what they call the REO homes?
So REO homes are ones that they had the note on, it's been foreclosed, and the bank bought it at the auction, which is very common because the bank looks at it this way. They say, we can probably sell it better ourselves and have a better chance of getting our money back because we can place it with a real estate broker, put it in the MLS, maybe fix it up a little. Once they own it, can they do all those things?
Yes.
Absolutely. And also, once they own it, if they end up selling it for more than what they were owed, can they keep the difference? Yes, because it's their property at that point in time. Does that make sense for everybody? They certainly can. So most often, the lender's going to be the first bid. As soon as the trustee, and in fact, it's usually the trustee that places the bid on behalf of the lender.
I think on two people.
You know, well, the trustee goes, they place it for auction, and they immediately place the first bid. And so what the first bid is going to be what the outstanding note is, plus the trustee's fees, plus the penalties. They add all that up, and there's the first bid. Boom. And usually, nobody comes and bids behind it.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
That's the most common path for a foreclosure property. Okay? Does that make sense for everybody?
Yeah, so all these shows on TV where they buying auction houses, that's half that ain't even real.
Well, it's real, it's just rare. Because what it means is somebody's been foreclosed for not paying their property taxes, but they didn't have a loan. Because if they had a loan, the lender's going to step up and pay their property taxes.
Okay.
Now, it does on rare occasion happen that somebody loses a job at a bank because they forget to bid on a property that they had a note on. Because imagine this, it is possible, like you mentioned earlier, what if they're paying their mortgage but they don't pay their property taxes? It's possible for somebody to do that, right? So now they get foreclosed on by Wake County. Well, some trust gets a notice from Wake County, gets a notice from the courthouse saying this property that you have this lien on is being foreclosed on. So it's in some trust's best interest to either go just pay the property taxes and then foreclose themselves, or buy the thing at the foreclosure auction. Does that make sense for everybody? Well, sometimes they lose the mail.
Oh, wow.
It's rare. And so sometimes that thing does get sold for $6,000.
Good, good.
And guess what? If it does, It does.
Party tonight,
Suntrust.
someone
You know?
else.
And so who takes the loss on that? SunTrust. Somebody just lost a job. Some portfolio manager just lost a job, I can assure you.
Wow. Now, when they sell it for 6,000, isn't the rest of it all still owed by the borrower? Or he ain't gonna get it?
By the borrower? Yes, it's owed by the borrower. We'll talk about a deficiency judgment.
Okay,
but-
but he ain't gonna get it.
Right, very unlikely to. Okay? So, distributing the money, paying out the proceeds. First, pay the cost of the sale. So that's going to be the trustee. It's going to be any fees associated with filing the auction at the courthouse, because there are fees for all those things. That's going to get paid first. So that comes out of the bucket of money first. This is after the property is sold at the foreclosure auction. This is the order in which everybody gets paid. Everybody good with me on that? Okay? So second is going to be property taxes. Property taxes and special assessments. Now we're pretty much in the same order as remember we talked about lien priority way back in chapter 3? We're pretty much in that same order now. So we got property taxes and special assessments, and then we got the mortgage debt. And mortgages, notice I said plural, mortgages, could there be more than one?
Yes.
Yes. This is where it becomes very important which one was recorded first. This is called a pure race statute. It's like a race to the courthouse, because the mortgages are going to get paid in the order they were what? Recorded. That's where the terminology first mortgage, second mortgage comes from. And folks, there ain't nothing fair about this. They don't go, well, you know, you're owed $100,000 and they're owed 20, so we'll just give you 95 and let them have 5 so they get something out. You pay all of the first mortgage first, and then if there's any money left, you start paying the second mortgage. This color choice was made for a reason. You're real good over here and real bad if you're down on this end. Because right about here, this pukey green color is where you run out of money on a foreclosure auction. Generally speaking, you're never going to get past this step with a foreclosure auction on most foreclosures. This is where the money runs out. And when it's gone, it's gone. So like your mechanics liens down here, for example, or HOA liens, what are they going to get out of this thing most likely? Nothing, because there's not going to be any money left over. And I always giggle when I see this last one at the end. If it does sell at the foreclosure auction for more money than is owed on it, where does the surplus go? Back to the original owner, the borrower that was just foreclosed on. But now let me point something out to you. And I hate to be mean to people, but I'm going to have to be right here. You got to be all grades of stupid to get foreclosed on if you could sell the property and pay off all the debts and there's money left over. Because you just cost yourself $20,000 in extra fees by going this route versus just doing what? Put it up for sale and sell it yourself. So if you ever find yourself or any client or any person you know in that situation where they owe a small amount of money and the property's worth a lot of money, when they start saying, well, I just want to keep my property, you got to look at them and grab them on both sides of the face and say, that ship has sailed. You going your way or their way. You're not going to keep it. They're going to take it from you. So do you want to sell it and put some money in your pocket, or do you want to let them foreclose on it and you not get anything out of it? Because it is childish to think at that point in time you're going to keep that property. When that notice of default comes, folks, it's over.
That's one of the questions I want to ask you. If the notice of default comes, could they do anything like sell it to?
They can sell it all the way up till it's no longer theirs. So they can still sell it, but they can't keep it. They've got to go.
So once that notice is done, it's over. They have no choice but to pay the loan off.
That's it, pay the loan off. And so, I mean, you're talking about somebody who couldn't even make their monthly payments. Are they going to be able to really pay the whole loan off at that point?
No.
And that's why I say it's childish to think it's going to happen that way. So the best course forward for that person is let's get it sold. Let's put it on the market and get it sold so that it never makes it to the auction block.
If we have a client that is already got a notice of default,
Mhm.
and we only got a matter
30 days probably if they got the notice of
And
default.
so, like, does that go like a normal transaction? Is that a common thing that you may see?
I would, in that case, I would probably put it on the market and only accept cash offers and market it that way. You know, it's available for cash offers. It needs to close in the next 21 days, you know, type thing. Now, is that going to take some of the value off of it? Sure, but it's not going to be nearly as bad as this would be. Does that make sense? It's still a better option than this is. And not just because of the monetary outcome. Think about their credit. You can save them from having a foreclosure on their credit history. They're still going to have the notice of default and they're going to have the late payments, but that's not nearly as bad as having the actual foreclosure on there. Everybody okay with that? All right? So this is the order that everything's going to get paid. And then this idea of redemption. Redemption is a wonderful sounding word, right? We all need to be redeemed every once in a while. What does redemption sound like when you're talking about a property and a foreclosure situation?
Make right. Make right.
To make it right. How do you make it right? You pay the money. And how much you owe? All of it. So how often does this happen? Not very commonly. The idea of redemption is simple. If the borrower can come up with the money at any point in time, all the way up to that final foreclosure sale, then they can redeem the property. And remember, the foreclosure sale is not final until the bids are there, and how long does that bid have to sit before it becomes final?
10 days.
10 days. So even during the 10-day period, if they hit a scratch-off lottery ticket, could they come and redeem the property in theory?
Wow.
Even if they've already been removed from the property, they can still redeem it as long as it's not been sold, as long as that sale is not finalized. And I have seen situations where people were racing, trying to sell them, racing, trying to get them closed, because even if you get it sold, that's a redemption, right? Because if you get it sold for enough money to pay off the debt, that's still a redemption. So I've seen that happen. Is everybody okay with the idea of redemption? Yes, ma'am, Michelle.
So, and I understand we can't practice law, but if someone truly wants to stay in their home, and they inquire about bankruptcy to save their house, then we just automatically
Send them to a bankruptcy attorney.
And they still would have 10 days for the upset bid to even file bankruptcy.
Well, they can redeem the property. I don't have any idea how filing for bankruptcy would, I don't know how quickly that would halt the process. You'd have to ask a bankruptcy attorney about that. I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
But, I mean, in theory, they still own the property all the way through the redemption period, which is 10 days after the high bid is set.
So you know, like many years we bought all the little real estate things. They used to have these things like purchasing foreclosures before they actually foreclose.
Mhm.
You can get them at a discount rate. Is that during that period?
Probably during some sort of a redemption period, I'm guessing.
You could talk with the
I'm guessing,
owner.
without looking at it in detail, yeah. Okay, we all good on this idea of redemption? It's just the idea of coming up with all the money, very rare. And then the final end result of a foreclosure is a nasty little gremlin called a deficiency judgment. Well, that second word is nasty.
Yeah.
A judgment. Because judgment's attached to people personally. This is a general lien. This is not a specific lien. Remember we talked about the difference between those two? We said the mortgage loan is a specific lien because it attaches to the property. If the lender goes and gets a deficiency judgment, that's not going to be attached to the property. That's going to be attached to what? To the person. So here's what happened. We go through the foreclosure process. The property gets sold. And there's not enough money to cover the outstanding mortgage loan debt. So the lender does not cut their losses and go, oh well, we lost. They sue you. And they sue the borrower for whatever the deficiency is. If the property was sold for $20,000 less than what was owed, they sue the borrower for $20,000. Now they know the borrower has no money, so they're not going to get the money right now, but what are they going to get? a judgment. And how long is that judgment going to follow this person around? Till they die, right? Or they pay it off. And what the banking industry knows is that there's a very high likelihood that at some point in the future this person's going to want to finance something else. And they're not going to be able to do it until they what? Until they satisfy this judgment. So, on a test, so this is like a test alert for you question, because it's one that people have struggled with in the past. If they give you a test question where they just set up a hypothetical and they say, you know, the house is sold for $100,000 but has $120,000 of outstanding mortgage debt on it. You with me so far? One of the answer choices is going to be that the lender takes a $20,000 loss. And that is the wrong answer, because we don't know for sure that the lender is going to take a $20,000 loss. What we do know for sure is that the lender is going to be entitled to a $20,000 deficiency judgment. The reason you can't say that the lender's taking a $20,000 loss is because they may at some point get what? They may at some point get paid. That's the whole point of the judgment. Does that make sense for everybody? So be very careful about that on the test. To understand, you can't always just chalk it up and say, oh, well, the lender took this much of a loss. Well, not necessarily, because they probably got a deficiency judgment for it, which means they're probably going to see eventually at least some of that money. The reason I say some of that money is what most of the big banks do now is sell the deficiency judgments to debt collectors for pennies on the dollar. So like if they get that, if let's say that Bank of America gets that $20,000 deficiency judgment, they'll turn around the next week and they'll sell it to some debt collection agency for $2,000. Now Bank of America's got their $2,000, they go on about their merry way, but you as the borrower now owe $20,000 to this ruthless debt collector that calls 600 times a day and beats on your door, and that's the normal practice for these things. Ugly, ain't it? We all good on deficiency judgment?
Not allowed in seller financing. I was wondering why. Like, why can't they?
Not allowed in seller financing. So the whole idea of being able to get a deficiency judgment in the first place is you weren't made whole by the foreclosure, right? That when the property was foreclosed on, you didn't get all your money back. Does that make sense? That's the idea of a deficiency judgment. Stop trying to think about the seller finance part of it, but just think about the deficiency judgment part. The whole point of a deficiency judgment is that you're going to the court and you're saying, Your Honor, we just foreclosed on this property, they sold it, and we still didn't get all our money, so we need this deficiency judgment in addition to make us whole. Does that make sense for everybody? In a seller finance deal, what did the seller enter the transaction with? The property. What are they walking away from the foreclosure with? The property. As far as the law is concerned, they've been made whole. They've gotten back exactly what they started with. And so that precludes them or prevents them from having the right to get a deficiency judgment. Because if you think about it, it would sort of be unfair to get the property back and to still say this person owes you an additional $25,000, considering you already also got the property back.
That's right.
Well, I'm confused. Seller financing, if the seller's financing, doesn't the title go to the person who is
The borrower.
the borrower?
Mm-hmm.
So they got.
Then it goes back to the seller.
But this is after a foreclosure. Remember, when a deficiency judgment would be is after a foreclosure. So now where is title at this point? It's back with the seller. So they've gotten back what they started with.
So they're not gonna go to all the auctions and all that kind of stuff.
Did I hear another question?
I was gonna say, when you said with the seller financing, they start with the house and they end up with the house, where the house is not in the same or decent condition as the.
That's the risk you take in doing seller financing. That's why when you do seller financing, you should make sure to get a down payment. Don't do 100% seller financing, because you do run that risk. You do absolutely run that risk. It's one of the dangers of seller financing. Okay? Deed in lieu of foreclosure. We got a couple slides left here and we'll take our break. A deed in lieu of foreclosure. In lieu of means instead of. Catherine can tell us all about this phrase. Her family runs funeral homes. In lieu of flowers, send donations, right? You know, In lieu of, that's one of my favorite expressions. You only see it when somebody dies. But in lieu of this and this. It means instead of. In lieu of just means instead of. So what does a deed do? What's a deed's purpose? Forget the rest of that stuff. What's a deed do? Transfer of title. So transfer in title instead of what? Foreclosure. So the name tells you what's happening. What is going on here? Instead of foreclosing, I'll do what? I'll just sign it over to you. This is the borrower saying to the bank, listen, I recognize we got a problem here. I owe you money. I can't pay you. You're going to foreclose. Don't do that. Here it is. I'll sign it over to you. It's yours. That's a deed in lieu of foreclosure. Does that make sense for everybody? Now, the catch to this, and by the way, every borrower would love to do this. This is a much better outcome for the borrower. Because you're going to lose the property anyway. And so what have you kept off your credit now?
The foreclosure.
A foreclosure. But it takes two to tango. The lender does not have to agree to this. And I'm going to tell you the main reason they won't agree to this. They can't get one of these. If they accept a deed in lieu of foreclosure, they're not allowed to get a deficiency judgment. They'd rather foreclose and get the deficiency judgment than they would accept the property, because they don't know what the property is going to sell for. And so if they take the property and it sells for a lot less, it's a guaranteed loss for them. Does that make sense for everybody? So they would, generally speaking. Now, if you had a property that the lender felt was worth way more than what was owed, would they be happy to accept a deed in lieu of foreclosure? Oh, yeah. If you go to them and say, I can't pay my mortgage, can I just sign the property over to you? And they look, well, you know, it's $60,000 and the house is worth $600,000. Yes, ma'am, we'll be glad to do a deed in lieu of foreclosure for you. Of course they would. Okay? Everybody all right with that? Just, you don't have to know any more detail about it than that. You don't even need to know, really, they can't get a deficiency judgment. You just need to know what a deed in lieu of foreclosure is. And then the last of the foreclosure avoidance techniques, and that's what this really is a short sale. A short sale is a way to avoid foreclosure. Well, what that means is that we're headed toward foreclosure. See, the first rule of a short sale is that we're destined for foreclosure. I almost made a really bad joke. I had to censor myself. Sorry, I almost said the first rule of a short sale is there is no short sale, but unless you're a Fight Club fan, you wouldn't connect the dots on that. So I discretionary deleted it, as I was thinking.
Thank you.
So short sales are a method of foreclosure avoidance. I'm trying to think how to present this the best way. The lender has a choice. The lender can be hit with a hammer on top of their hand, or they can be shot in the face with a bazooka. Now, neither of those is a good outcome. Would you agree with that?
No way. No way.
But is there one that is obviously better than the other? I mean, if you've got to choose one or the other, which one are you choosing? The hammer. The short sale is the hammer. Foreclosure is the bazooka. See, the only way a lender is going to agree with a short sale is if they feel that the only other alternative is what? Is foreclosure. They have to feel that there's no way we're going to avoid a foreclosure on this property. And not only that we're not going to avoid a foreclosure, but there is a big whopping loss at the end of that foreclosure. So what else do they need to believe about the property? That it's not what? It's not worth what's owed on it. They are owed a lot more than it's worth. So they are terrified of a foreclosure happening. They're terrified that when this foreclosure happens, there's a huge loss at the end of this thing. Because the actual foreclosure, does the foreclosure make the loss worse?
Yes.
Yeah, because of all the fees. Plus, if we send the notice of default, it could be months before we actually see any of that money. So that's months more where they're not making a mortgage payment. Does that make sense for everybody? So the lender is terrified of foreclosure. Well, here's why they're terrified of foreclosure. Another rule of short sales. The borrower's not making their mortgage payment, folks. Put yourself in the lender's shoes. If Patrice calls SunTrust and says, listen, I'm upside down on my house. I owe y'all like $100,000 more than it's worth. And I just got to sell it. And I want you guys to let me sell it for less than I owe you. Because that's what a short sale is. The bank's letting you sell it for less than they are owed. And she's asking SunTrust to let her sell it for less than they're owed. And they pull up her account and she's current on that mortgage. What do you think they're going to say to her? No. I mean, like, you're doing such a good job. Just keep doing it. Because again, see, they don't feel any threat of foreclosure if you're doing what? If you're paying on it. So you've got a borrower that's in trouble. They're not paying. You've got a piece of collateral, a property that's not worth the amount of money that's been loaned out. And you've got a lender who's petrified of foreclosure. That is a recipe for a short sale. Because the short sale in that situation can be better for both the lender and the borrower. So what's happening in a short sale is the borrower is placing their house for sale just like any other seller would. Except they now have been given permission to accept a price that is what? Lower than what their outstanding loan amount is. The lender is going to agree to accept less. That's a short sale. But it's only going to happen if you meet that criteria.
So, so in this instance, because the lender agreed and they can't get a deficiency.
They can get a deficiency judgment.
Oh, so they still can.
Mm-hmm.
So I would still go this route if you still
Save
know
on
about
fees.
Save on the fees. Your deficiency judgment is going to be a lot less because there's not going to be any foreclosure fees attached to it, number one. Number two, short sale has much less of a detrimental impact on credit than short sale, 2-3 years, you can buy another house. Foreclosure, 7 years. So there are pretty substantial credit differences between a short sale and a foreclosure. And the other thing is, and don't discount the importance of this, just the shame factor. When your house is foreclosed on, everybody knows what happened. Because they see those notices stamped on the front door. They see the sheriff's deputies over there. They know what's going on. When you're selling it as a short sale, what does it look like? A house for sale. So that's worth something too. Yes, ma'am.
So how would the lender get, if they're selling it for less than what's owed on it?
Yep.
How's the lender getting the rest of that money, or are they not worrying about that?
Well, they still can go get a deficiency judgment against the borrower.
It actually happened to my kid, my daughter, when she got married young and dumb. They bought a house right away, and divorce happened within 2 years. And of course, they owed more on the value of the house almost right in that margin. So the bank negotiated with them. They did a short sale, and then after the divorce was final, they split it right in half. My daughter had to pay her portion, and my
They had a deficiency judgment for it.
for the remainder, and they both had to pay their portions of it.
And believe it or not, in that case, the deficiency judgment might be better than them actually forgiving the debt. Because here's the ugly truth. If they forgive the debt, that's income. What do you have to do on income? You got to pay taxes. They forgive $50,000 in mortgage debt, that's $50,000 you got to pay taxes on that year. You're already talking about somebody who couldn't pay a mortgage payment. Now they're going to hop to the IRS. That is not a pretty picture. So you probably would prefer to have the deficiency judgment. Do you have a question, Molly?
Yeah, so I wanted to ask, do most of them go to short sale before foreclosure? Because you was talking like foreclosure is almost like imminent, like it's gonna happen once that little letter come out. And
Well,
now,
once the letter comes out, it is. Generally speaking,
you try to do this before the letter comes out?
yes, exactly. As soon as you get behind on the mortgage payments, you would try to initiate the conversation about a short sale. Because once the notice of default has been sent, you've already started to tack on the fees. You've taken away some of the motivation to do the short sale because those trustees' fees are now there.
Okay, so ain't no short sale with state employee pay anymore.
State employees will do it,
Fast
they will under certain circumstances do a
Right.
short sale, yeah, I mean, if it makes sense, they look at it on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, so we did a
Don't
mark.
have any equity though.
Well, that's also, I mean, that's the thing, there's no equity because you owe more than the property's worth. And not only can there be no equity, here's the ugly, and this won't be on the test, but here's the really ugly one. In order to qualify for a short sale, the first thing they're going to see is, do you have any assets? Because if you got retirement accounts you can cash out, they'll be like, oh no, you just cash out your retirement account and write us a check for the difference. They're not going to approve a short sale if you have any access to any funds, if you got stocks, bonds, cash, retirement accounts, they will go. So, I mean, basically, remember what I said, they have to feel that the only other option is foreclosure. They're never going to approve a short sale if they feel that there's any other way that they can get this money. Yes, ma'am.
So one thing with the short sale also, at least they getting some money, but do they determine how low you could go or?
The bank?
Yeah, with the.
Yes,
short
it's
sale.
going to be the lender ultimately who decides what the number is. What they're going to tell you is bring us the offers and then they will review the offers.
Oh,
And they'll make a call on it.
oh,
And by the way, this verbiage, short, has nothing to do with timing. That would be called long sales because they take forever because you have to wait for the bank to respond on the offers. And
Why does it take so long?
they are so slow for the bank to respond on these offers. I waited 17 months one time for a response on a short sale offer. Yeah. Bank of America, back when the mortgage meltdown was in full swing, 17 months. And my clients had bought another house a year earlier. And had rescinded their offer, and then here comes Bank of America saying, well, we've accepted your offer. We're like, you ain't got no offer to accept. I mean, that thing's been gone for a long time. So,
I have one going on, it's 8 years,
8 years? Oh my goodness.
still, and it's a mess.
They can be. Especially if you get multiple lenders. If you get multiple, like a first mortgage and a second mortgage, because then you have to get both of them to agree. And usually that means, so like, look at it this way, and this is going deeper into a short sale than you need for the exam, but just to get your brain in the right place. Let's say you've got two notes out there. You've got a $100,000 note to BB&T, and you've got a $25,000 second mortgage to SunTrust. And now the borrower wants to do a short sale. BB&T says absolutely not. And the reason they say absolutely not is because they feel that they can foreclose, because they feel the property at a foreclosure sale sell for $120,000. That's what they feel it'll sell for at a foreclosure sale. So does BB&T have any motivation to do a short sale? No. Because if it sells for $120,000 at a foreclosure sale, BB&T's going to get what? They're going to get all their money. Now, does SunTrust have motivation for a short sale? They do. Here's the problem. SunTrust can't do it unless BB&T agrees. And BB&T's going to say no because they want all their money. So what they may have to do is SunTrust may have to agree to eat all of the loss on the short sale just to make BB&T whole to make the short sale happen.
so if they don't get paid either way, why worry about it? Because if you said they're gonna probably take $20,000 away from that for the fees, for
Right.
foreclosure, the trustee fees and all that. So BB&T will get their 100 after all the property
Why I worry
taxes.
about it? Because they'd rather screw SunTrust out of the 25. And that's the truth.
Yeah, but I'm saying SunTrust not gonna get it either way.
Oh, sure they will. Because if SunTrust can short sale it for $120 versus foreclosure sale it for $120, SunTrust will get $20,000 of their money. But
Oh, because
SunTrust
you don't
can't
have
short sell it unless they get BB&T to agree.
Oh, because they're not gonna have the trustee fees and all that.
That's right.
Oh,
That's
okay.
exactly
So they
right.
possibly get their money.
That's exactly right. And here's the other, and it could be uglier. This is when being in second place ain't so bad. What if it's the other way? What if we looked at the foreclosure sale value and it's $80,000? Same two notes. But we think it'll sell for $80,000. Is everybody in trouble now? Everybody's in trouble. So, borrower wants to do a short sale. They contact BB&T, they contact SunTrust. BB&T says, absolutely, short sale sounds good to us. What do you think SunTrust says?
No, because they don't get nothing.
SunTrust is looking at a big fat zero no matter how this thing sells, right? They're looking at it saying, I don't care whether it sells foreclosure, short sale, no sale, whatever, we getting zero. And so you know who they got over a barrel now? BB&T. So now SunTrust is going to contact BB&T and they're going to say, how bad do you want to short sell this thing? I don't know, we think we ought to get at least $10,000 of our money back. So that's why it takes so long, because you've got all this crazy negotiations going on behind the scenes with this mess. Because of the way they're structured.
Sound like Burger King, McDonald's fight.
Pretty much. Pretty much.
So meanwhile, you're still living in the house while they're haggling with each other.
And not making a mortgage payment.
And hoping to God they
Stay in their house and not making a mortgage payment.
What a deal.
And that's the other reason why the short sale route is so much better for the borrower, because one of the first things the lender agrees when they say yes to a potential short sale, one of the first things they agree to do is put a halt to the foreclosure process. And so they're agreeing to give you time to market and try to sell the property where you're not making a mortgage payment.
So in that 17 months he died to wait, that person didn't have to make a mortgage?
I wasn't their agent, I was on the buyer side, but I'm assuming not. I'm assuming they never made a mortgage payment during that 17 months.
That's real good for the borrower.
Yeah. Okay, does everybody understand the idea of a short sale here?
Wow.
Okay. Last thing we want to talk about before our break is an assumption. Notes can be assumed. Loans can be assumed. Notes and loans are the same thing. So when we buy a home, most of the time, we go and take out a new mortgage loan in order to finance that purchase. However, it is theoretically possible to not only buy the house from Kathy, but to take over Kathy's loan. Why do you think I would prefer to take over Kathy's loan? Why wouldn't I just go get my own? And it's not going to be about qualification. Let's say I'm qualified for both. Why would I prefer to take over Kathy's loan than go get my own? What must be true about the two loans?
Kathy's interest rate's a rocking low rate.
Kathy's interest rate is much better than what I can get when I go get a new loan right now. So Kathy bought at a point in time when interest rates were really low, and now interest rates have done what? They've gone up. So if I take out a new loan, I'd be taking it out at that higher current amount. So which would I rather do? Take over Kathy's 3.5% interest rate loan or go get a 5% interest rate loan of my own right now? I'd rather have her 3.5%. That's called an assumption. It's a lot like an assignment of contract. It's the same thing as an assignment. If you were going to say that, then bravo, because that's exactly what it is. Right. With an assignment of contract, the contract stays the same, but the parties change, right? And that's exactly what's happening here. We're taking Kathy's name off of the borrower line, and we're putting the new buyer's name on to the borrower's line. So Kathy's no longer responsible for repayment of the loan. Who is? The buyer. The buyer. Here's what's interesting about that. That's actually good for Kathy, too. Because she can use that as a marketing tool on her property. She can put a sign out in front of her house that says, assumable, low rate, low interest loan. Is that going to generate some more attention? Absolutely. And when people find out that they can buy her house and the house payment will be $125 less a month than buying the house next door, are they more interested in her house? Absolutely. This is going to become a big deal. And it won't be long before it is, because we're coming from a time with historically low interest rates. Where 3.5%, 3.75% was not uncommon for a 30-year fixed rate note. We're already at about 4.5%, 4.75%. We get to 6%, 7%. Are those 3.5% interest rate loans going to be very alluring? Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, but I've heard that they do not do these assumption mortgages anymore, that they're almost something in the past. When I did that in Texas, actually did that, I assumed somebody else's mortgage. They were in trouble, we gave them a cash payment, boom, went down, we qualified, you still have to qualify
Yeah,
for
you're
that
qualified.
to take over, we took it over. The house value is 120, they owed 80, we gave them, I think it was like 15,000, they walked away, and then we got the house. So there's a lot of variables, but I was told by the mortgage that there was so few of these type of assumption mortgages, or that they were phasing them out.
They have pretty much been phased out of the conventional marketplace, but there's one major category of loans that by law are fully assumable. All of the government-backed loans are fully assumable. So FHA loans, VA loans, USDA loans are all fully assumable still.
Yeah, because that's what I was gonna ask you, because a lot of the lenders say is non-assumable.
Right.
But you could see.
Because you would think about it, last thing a lender would want you to do is assume, right? You know, why would the lender want me to assume Kathy's 3.5 rate loan if the option was to go out and get a 5% loan? They want me to get the 5% loan. So when it's under the lender's control, generally loans are going to be not assumable. But there are certain loans, the government-backed loans, which if the bank decides to make those, they have to make them assumable by law because they're fully assumable loans.
You assume the time that was already paid, so 5 to 10 years into a 30-year mortgage?
You pick it up right where it is. You pick it, and you pay the difference in cash. It's called the boot. You give them the money in the boot. You know, that's what it's called. You know, so like for example, if I'm paying the seller $200, let's say I'm paying you $200,000 for your house, and you owe $160 on your mortgage. I owe you $40,000 because I'm taking over your $160 mortgage, but I'm paying you the difference. So you still get you get the same amount of cash no matter what. Because if I had bought the house from you, you'd only had $40,000 left over anyway, because you'd have had to do what? You have to pay the mortgage off, right? So you come out exactly the same. Yes, ma'am.
How does that benefit us?
What do you mean, how's it benefit?
As a realtor?
As a realtor? A realtor? No, as a realtor, as a real estate broker, it benefits us to know about it because it's going to be highly in demand with buyers when interest rates do creep back up.
Right, but how do we get compensated for it?
We're still selling the house.
Okay.
We're still selling the house. I mean, it's still a sales transaction. So just because somebody's taking over Kathy's loan, they're still buying the house from her. So there'll still be a commission paid on the sale, just like any other sale. What about getting paid? Good for you.
That's most important.
Yes, ma'am, Molly.
So with this, the assuming part where they have to bring the money, so do they get another loan for that part?
They could. They could take out a second note, or they could pay cash.
Or they could
take out a second note as well for the smaller amount.
Do they have to pay a new origination thing and redo the documents and pay all those?
No. There might be an assumption fee. There's usually a fee associated with the assumption, but it's usually going to be significantly less than origination fees. That's right. They don't like
They
it.
can't make all their fees.
That's right.
After origination.
They're not fans.
All right.
So pretty much you only see it now in the government-backed loans.
But at least they're not foreclosed until they do some.
That's right. Okay. Everybody good on assumption here? Okay. All right. That brings us to break time, which I think everybody will do.
Yeah.
All right. So let's take a break. Why don't you come back at say about 10 minutes to 8, okay? And it's about 15 minutes, and we will talk about promissory notes. What's standing me like that for? You going to? You're pulling my day. It's a long day. Well, it's not exactly the most engaging material either. I see you nodding a lot though. That means you understand what's going on, Mike.
I was like, look like those sleep.